You knew something changed before they ever admitted it. Not because of one big moment, because of the tiny things your nervous system noticed before your mind could explain them. The slower replies, the dry tone, the way they viewed your story instantly but left your message sitting there for hours like your words suddenly weighed nothing. And the worst part? Watching them act completely normal online while you sat there replaying every conversation, trying to figure out what you did wrong. That confusion is not random. Sometimes people do not control you through rejection. They control you through inconsistency. One day they make you feel chosen. The next day they make you feel replaceable. And your brain starts chasing the version of them that existed in the beginning. That is why certain questions are dangerous. Not because the words themselves matter, but because answering them hands people access to your emotional wiring. Your fears, your loneliness, your need for reassurance, your attachment patterns. Some people may never use that information against you consciously, but many people still respond to it in ways that slowly shift the power dynamic without you realizing it. And before long, you are no longer talking naturally. You are performing for acceptance, editing your emotions, pretending to be less hurt than you are, trying not to sound needy while silently waiting for crumbs of attention. Stay with me, because the next part explains why being ignored feels physically painful, and why most people lose themselves trying to escape that feeling. The message itself was not what broke you. It was the waiting. The moment your brain realized something felt off, your entire body shifted into surveillance mode. Suddenly your attention was no longer on your life. It was on them, their activity status, their following list, their story views. The time between replies became emotionally louder than the actual conversation. And this is where most people misunderstand what being ignored really does. It is not just disappointment. In many cases, it activates something much deeper, emotional uncertainty. Your nervous system starts treating inconsistency like a threat, not because you are weak, because the human brain is wired to search for emotional stability. When someone gives affection unpredictably, your mind does not relax. It obsesses. That is why you keep checking your phone even after telling yourself you are done. Why one notification changes your entire mood. Why you rehearse messages you never send. Why you feel embarrassed for caring, but cannot stop caring anyway. Pause here, because this part matters. Sometimes the pain is not about losing the person. It is about losing clarity. Your brain keeps replaying moments trying to solve the emotional puzzle. Were they pretending? Did I say too much? Why were they warm yesterday and cold today? This creates an overthinking loop, and the dangerous part is that your self-worth slowly becomes tied to their response time. Their attention starts feeling like emotional oxygen. You were not dramatic for noticing the shift. You were reacting to inconsistency, not inventing it. But this is where people begin abandoning themselves. Instead of asking, why am I accepting confusion? They ask, how do I become easier to love? So they shrink. They stop expressing needs. They become hyper-aware of sounding too emotional. They apologize for basic reactions. And people who benefit from emotional imbalance often notice that shift immediately. Because once someone learns that silence makes you panic, silence becomes power. But the next part goes even deeper. Because chasing someone after they pull away does something most people never realize until it is too late. The moment you start chasing clarity from someone who keeps creating confusion, the dynamic changes. Not all at once. Quietly. At first it feels harmless. You send the double text because you care. You ask if everything is okay because you want honesty. You try harder because you believe communication fixes distance. But in many cases, repeated chasing teaches the other person something dangerous. That your boundaries move when your emotions are involved. And once someone realizes you will stay through inconsistency, disappearances, mixed signals, or emotional coldness, your presence stops feeling valuable to them. Not because you lack worth, because predictability removes urgency. Here is the twist most people never see. Chasing rarely creates connection. It often creates imbalance. The more anxious you become, the calmer they appear. The more you explain yourself, the less they feel pressure to explain anything. You start carrying the emotional weight of the relationship alone while they drift in and out whenever it benefits them. You have probably lived this already. They disappear for 2 days, then come back with a casual "my bad." No accountability, no real explanation. And instead of confronting the disrespect, you feel relieved they returned at all. That relief is the trap, because your nervous system starts rewarding inconsistency. Tiny moments of attention begin feeling intensely valuable after long periods of emotional uncertainty. Psychologists sometimes call this intermittent reinforcement, but in real life it looks like waiting all day for one dry message that still somehow calms you down. Stay with me because this next part explains why people lose themselves without noticing. When chasing becomes a habit, you slowly stop asking whether someone deserves access to you. You only focus on whether you can regain access to them. That is why people over-explain. Why they tolerate behavior they would never accept from a friend. Why they become afraid to speak honestly in case the other person pulls away again. You were not weak for hoping things would change. But hope without boundaries turns self-respect into negotiation. And the next section explains the mistake that keeps people trapped the longest, believing promises while ignoring patterns. People rarely reveal themselves through one dramatic betrayal. They reveal themselves through repetition. The problem is that most people do not fall for behavior. They fall for potential. For the version of someone that appears during emotional highs, the deep conversations at 2 a.m., the sudden vulnerability, the moments where they look at you like you are the only person in the world. And when those moments disappear, you keep holding on to the memory of them like proof that the connection was real. But this is the moment where silence becomes louder than any explanation. Because patterns tell the truth that words keep trying to soften. Someone may say they miss you while continuing to ignore your messages for days. They may promise consistency while repeatedly disappearing the second emotions become serious. They may call you important while making you feel emotionally disposable whenever something more convenient appears. And your mind keeps trying to merge the two versions together, the caring version and the distant version. So you excuse behavior that would normally feel unacceptable. That is just how they are. They are going through something. Maybe I'm expecting too much, but the next part is what nobody wants to admit. When someone consistently creates confusion, uncertainty often becomes part of the dynamic itself. In many cases, they may not even fully understand what they are doing. Some people seek attention when lonely, then pull away when closeness requires responsibility. Others enjoy emotional access without wanting emotional accountability. And the person caught in the middle keeps waiting for consistency to finally arrive. You are not stupid for believing their words. Words matter. But behavior matters more because behavior costs something. Anyone can promise reassurance in a calm moment. Patterns reveal what someone does when reassurance becomes inconvenient. That is why emotionally aware people stop analyzing isolated moments. They study cycles, not the apology. The repetition after the apology, not the affection. The stability of the affection, not how someone acts when they fear losing you. How they act once they feel secure that you will stay. Because once you start reading patterns instead of promises, people become much easier to understand. And that understanding leads to something even more dangerous, realizing how slowly emotional confusion can change the way you see yourself. The dangerous part is not what they did. It is what you slowly started believing about yourself after they did it. At first, you questioned their behavior. Then eventually, you questioned your worth. That is how emotional inconsistency rewrites identity. Not through one rejection, but through repetition. Through being treated like an option often enough that you start shrinking before anyone even asks you to. You stop sending the long message. You stop expressing disappointment. You pretend things do not hurt because you are afraid honesty will push them away. And without noticing, you begin managing yourself around someone else's comfort. This is where many people lose their emotional center. You become hyper-aware of your tone, your timing, your reactions. You reread texts before sending them, trying to sound calm enough to deserve basic respect. Meanwhile, the other person moves freely, knowing you will probably still be there after the silence ends. Pause here, because this is the part most people miss. The human mind adapts to emotional environments. If you spend enough time around inconsistency, your nervous system begins treating anxiety as normal connection. Peace starts feeling unfamiliar. You become addicted to emotional relief instead of emotional safety. That is why stable attention can feel boring after chaotic attachment. Why some people miss the person who hurt them more than the people who treated them well. Not because toxicity is love, because unpredictability creates emotional intensity, and intensity can imitate connection when you are emotionally exhausted. You are not weak for being affected by it. Anyone repeatedly exposed to uncertainty can begin internalizing it. But this is where the power shift begins. The moment you stop asking, how do I keep them interested? And start asking, why am I abandoning myself to keep someone comfortable? everything changes. And if something in this video just made you pause, that pause matters. Stay with it. And if you want to keep going deeper, subscribing means the next video finds you when you need it most. Because the next section is where emotional discipline becomes real, not through speeches. Through boundaries people can actually feel. Most people think boundaries are words. They are not. A real boundary is what changes after someone crosses the line. That is why so many people say, I deserve better, than stay in the exact same cycle the moment the other person comes back acting softer. And people notice that contradiction immediately. Someone ignores you for days. You finally decide you are done. Then they send one late-night message saying, I've just been stressed. And suddenly all the pain disappears long enough for the cycle to restart. This is not because you are irrational. It is because emotional attachment often wants relief more than resolution. But this is where most people lose their power. They confuse communication with consequences. Explaining your feelings matters. Honest conversations matter. But if someone repeatedly experiences your boundaries without ever experiencing distance, access, or accountability changing afterward, the pattern usually continues exactly as before. Because boundaries are not requests for different treatment, they are decisions about what you will continue participating in. That is why emotionally disciplined people stop arguing for understanding from people committed to misunderstanding them. They stop over-explaining pain to people who only become attentive when they feel you pulling away. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the strongest boundary is silence, not silent manipulation, not revenge, not trying to make someone chase you. Real silence. The kind where you stop performing emotional labor for people who keep benefiting from your confusion. You stop sending paragraphs trying to prove your value. You stop negotiating for consistency. You stop explaining why basic respect should matter. You simply observe who becomes curious when your energy changes, who only reaches out when access feels threatened, who disappears the moment accountability enters the conversation. Because boundaries expose intentions faster than arguments ever will. You do not need to punish people to protect yourself. You just need the discipline to stop giving unlimited access to people who keep showing limited care. And the next part is where this becomes dangerous again. Because sometimes the people who ignored you return the second they feel you emotionally detaching. The return is usually not dramatic, no long apology, no deep realization, just a random message after weeks of silence like nothing ever happened. Hey, you've been thinking about you. How have you been? And suddenly your chest tightens all over again. Because the part of you that suffered through the confusion wants to believe this means something changed. That maybe this time they finally understand your value. Maybe this time the cycle will be different. But pause here before you answer. Sometimes people return because they miss connection. Sometimes they return because loneliness hit. Sometimes they return because your absence interrupted the emotional access they had to you. Those are not the same thing. This is why emotional discipline matters most after silence, not during it. Anyone can stay distant when angry. The real test is whether you remember why you pulled away once attention returns. Because attention can feel like healing even when nothing underneath has actually changed. You have probably seen this pattern before. They ignore you for days, then suddenly become warm again the moment you stop reacting. The energy shifts the second they feel you emotionally slipping away. And the dangerous part is not their return. It is your memory becoming selective. Your mind starts replaying the good moments while minimizing the confusion that broke you. The nervous system craves relief, so your brain tries to protect the connection instead of protecting you. That is why people reopen doors they spent months trying to close. But here's the hidden truth. Real change is not measured by emotional words after distance. It is measured by consistent behavior after reconnection. Not "I miss you," not "I've changed," not temporary intensity, consistency, accountability, stability. Because someone who truly values your presence does not only return when they feel your absence. They return with different behavior. You do not need to become cold to protect yourself. You just need to stop confusing temporary attention with permanent change. And the final section is the hardest lesson of all. How to let go without losing your softness, your ability to care, or your belief in connection itself. Most people misunderstand detachment. They think it means becoming cold, unemotional, untouchable. Like the only way to stop getting hurt is to stop caring completely. But real detachment is not the death of emotion. It is the end of emotional dependence. It is the moment you stop needing someone else's consistency to feel stable inside yourself. That does not happen overnight. At first, you still think about them when your phone lights up. You still feel the urge to check their story. Certain songs still bring everything back for a second. Healing is rarely clean like people pretend it is, but something slowly changes. You stop romanticizing confusion. You stop translating bare minimum attention into deep connection. You stop treating emotional uncertainty like chemistry. And that shift changes everything. Because now when someone acts hot and cold, you notice it without immediately blaming yourself. When someone disappears, you no longer chase closure from the same person creating the confusion. You observe the pattern and protect your peace before your identity starts bending around their inconsistency again. This is not about becoming heartless. You can still care deeply, still love honestly, still miss people. But emotionally mature detachment means understanding that caring about someone does not automatically mean they deserve unlimited access to your mind, your time, or your nervous system. Stay with this thought for a second. Some people were never meant to stay in your life permanently. They entered your life to expose the parts of you still begging for validation through suffering. And once you see that clearly, the need to chase begins dissolving on its own. You were not weak for loving. You were not foolish for hoping. The pain was real, but it does not need to become your personality. The strongest people are not the ones who stop feeling. They are the ones who learn how to feel without abandoning themselves in the process. And that brings us to the final truth. The questions you stop answering eventually become the boundaries that save you. At some point, you stop asking why they ignored you. And you start asking why you kept abandoning your own peace, trying to earn consistency from someone committed to confusion. That is the real shift. Not becoming colder, not becoming harder, becoming clearer. Clear enough to recognize when attention is not respect. Clear enough to stop mistaking anxiety for connection. Clear enough to understand that the right people do not leave you constantly questioning your worth just to feel close to them. You do not need to beg for clarity from people who benefit from keeping things unclear. You do not need to over-explain your pain to people who only listen once you start pulling away. And you definitely do not need to shrink yourself just to keep someone comfortable with giving you less than you deserve. The dangerous part was never being ignored. It was the slow emotional erosion that happened afterward. The way confusion made you doubt your standards. The way inconsistency trained you to accept emotional crumbs like they were intimacy. But now you see the pattern. And once you see it clearly, silence stops feeling like punishment. It starts feeling like protection. So stop chasing people who only value your presence after feeling your absence. Stop answering questions that force you to prove your worth. Stop reopening doors that only lead back to the same emotional maze. Protect your attention. Protect your nervous system. Protect the version of you that still knows love should feel safe, not psychologically exhausting. And if this video gave words to something you have been carrying quietly for a long time, subscribe. Not for motivation, for clarity. Because the next video will go even deeper into why emotionally unavailable people always seem unforgettable, and how to finally break that cycle without losing yourself in the process.